This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. The Nigel Farage Show.
Good morning, everybody. Well, I'm here in Washington, D.C., but it's somebody who's been a politician in this city for the last 30 years who's making the news back in the U.K. Yes, it's Hillary Clinton. She's on tour. We saw last week in the Sunday Times that interview. We knew she was coming to London. We had some idea what she was going to say. Ostensibly, she's in London to launch a book. The book is called What Happened? It's available for £20 a copy, and you really should go and buy it because the Clintons clearly have not yet made enough money out of politics and public life. Haha. But really what it's about is she is still in a state of total shock and denial about the great events of 2016, being, of course, Brexit and Trump. This morning, she appeared on The Mars Show. Let's have a listen to what Hillary said, and then perhaps I might tell you what I really think about her. So, to begin with, she was very vocal about Brexit, and especially what no deal would mean. Oh, and also, while she was there, she had some kind words to say about me.
I think it would be a very big disadvantage to Britain. I mean, no deal, meaning no preferential trade deals, which means products in Britain would not have the kind of easy access to the European market that you've had under EU membership. It could very well mean that there would be more pressure on businesses in Britain, if not to leave completely, at least to also have sites and employment elsewhere in Europe. I think that the disruption for Britain could be, quite serious.
A lot of people on the other side of the argument here, on the pro-Brexit side, look to America and they see that is our future. A new great big trade deal with Donald Trump is the way forward for Britain.
Well, yes, but you're making a trade deal with someone who says he doesn't believe in trade. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to play out over the next few years. But I wanted to make another point about Brexit. Looking at the Brexit vote now, it was a precursor to some extent of what happened to us in the United States. But the amount of fabricated, false information that your voters were given by the Leave campaign.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not as familiar with, but I'm very familiar with what the Leave side said because they transported a lot of that on behalf of Trump. You had, Farage campaigning for Trump and the like. The big lie is a very potent tool, and we've somewhat kept it at bay in Western democracies, partly because of the freedom of the press. But given the absolutely explosive spread of online news and sites that have sprung up that are very effective at propagating false stories, we've got some thinking to do about how we're going to, not to say, you have to agree with me, that's not what I'm saying at all, but there has to be some basic level of fact and evidence in our politics, well, frankly, in all parts of our society.
Well, she doesn't like me very much, does she? And she doesn't like the internet because she'd much rather that you got all of your news and all of your information through the establishment liberal media. Well, she didn't stop there, and she was also asked whether her political rhetoric had let her down during the US campaign.
I think we're at a point in politics, maybe it's true here as it is in our country, where being thoughtful is viewed as somehow inauthentic. If you're taking your time formulating an answer to a very difficult question, and you've prepared, you have a lot of thoughts about it, that's not as immediately satisfying as just, coming out with some kind of rhetorical blast. So I thought it was odd that my experience was somehow not considered, sufficient in the new world in which we find ourselves, and that in a reality TV campaign, you get much more points if you're fast and quick and a little bit on the attack and insulting, because people say, oh, that's real. Well, it's not anymore real, but it does come across that way.
There we are. She was the intelligent candidate, and Trump is merely a product of television, of reality TV. And Trump himself, of course, was next in the firing line. She really doesn't like the Donald. She views him as an authoritarian, and she's concerned about his links with Putin.
In the last few weeks, we've seen examples of what I worried about. He made a statement the other day saying that NBC, one of our big broadcast TV networks, should have their license questioned because he doesn't like the stories that they produce about him.
So you think on the press, on the media, he's going beyond angry tweets who are actually challenging the fabric of American media itself?
I think he wants to. That's why I said he wants to be like an authoritarian. He wants to. So far, he has been checked and balanced under our Constitution to a limited extent by the Congress and by the court system. So I think that the fabric is certainly being stretched.
Okay, let's talk about Russia, because as I say, it's a very interesting part of your book. And for people who don't know all the detail, it's a very complicated and detailed story. Can you just explain what the Russians did during the campaign, in your view?
Well, the Russians wanted to help Trump and hurt me. In their wildest dreams, they wanted to elect him and defeat me.
Why was that?
Well, I think for several reasons. Our intelligence community says that Putin had a personal grudge against me, in part because as Secretary of State, I spoke out about human rights abuses, illegitimate election activities within Russia. He wants to undermine NATO, the EU, American stability, and he has a lot of practice from Soviet days to the present in doing propaganda, having content organizations, they're called content farms in places like Macedonia, pumping out fake news, having Russians posing as Americans, and not just to denigrate me, which was a big part of what they did, but to sow distrust and division.
And she warns all of us across the West about foreign interference in elections.
I think Britain has a lot at stake in this, and I think this is affecting all of Western democracies. So part of what has to happen is cracking down on foreign interference in your election. And anyone who makes common cause with Russia, China, Iran, whoever it might be, right now it's Russia because they're the ones trying to destabilize Europe, should be held accountable, civilly and criminally, in my opinion.
Well, that was Hillary Clinton this morning on the Andrew Marr Show. Nothing there that particularly surprises me. The fact is, she is in a state of shock, as are the entire global elite about the events of 2016. Brexit was the thing they never thought would happen. And she acknowledges, and I think she's right, that Brexit led directly to the election of Donald Trump, which I guess is why the day after I appeared on a platform in Jackson, Mississippi with Trump, she took to the airwaves and she called me, I was a misogynist, racist, homophobe. I mean, the list goes on, white supremacist. I mean, any attempt to try to damage a messenger who'd been part of the Brexit campaign. I have to say, I think this is now becoming a great whinge-a-thon. And despite the fact that she says she won't run for the US president again, I think she might. And I think she wants to keep herself relevant on the world stage. She is part of a global elite, along with people like Tony Blair, who want to do everything they can to reverse the Brexit result. She doesn't just believe in the European Union. She said to a lot of her Wall Street friends in a meeting that she didn't think was being recorded last year, that she wanted America to be part of a hemispheric common market. And she's now doing everything she can to sabotage a future trade deal between the UK and the United States of America by coming out with an outright lie that Trump is against trade. Trump is not against trade. Trump actually wants to have free trade deals with countries that he thinks are of similar value. What he doesn't want is American workers undercut by China and places in the Far East. I think Hillary Clinton is not only in a state of denial, I think she's making herself look frankly ridiculous. In her book, she blames the whole world, the Russians, the lies that were told in Brexit, everything is the fault of other people. Nothing is to do with her. And actually, many American voters were turned off by her, and turned off by her sense of entitlement. It was as if the presidency was meant to be hers, and she believed, to the moment the polls closed, that she would win comfortably. I don't think Hillary Clinton has much relevance. And as to the question, should we listen to Hillary Clinton, I would say we should no more listen to Hillary Clinton than we listened to Barack Obama during the referendum campaign, telling us not to vote for Brexit. Hillary, you lost. Move on. The war is over for you. Well, that's my view, and I believe it really pretty strongly. And I want your views on this. I mean, tell me I'm wrong. Tell me we should listen to Hillary Clinton and that she is a very relevant person, and you can do that by calling 0345 60 60 973. You can text me on 84850. You can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. You can watch us live on Facebook and comment there too. And after the break, we will go to one of Hillary Clinton's former speechwriters to make sure this show's got balance, and he's going to tell us that she's one of the most wonderful women that has ever lived. Right now, you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, our Sunday edition, and it's 10:15. Well, earlier on today, we spoke to Hillary Clinton's former speechwriter. He's a director of the Bretton Woods 2 programme at New America. His name is Tamika Tillman, and he's a big supporter of Hillary Clinton. And it's important, I think, to get, a supportive voice. Let's hear what she's about, what motivates her, because my opinion is pretty clear on the other side. And we asked him earlier on this morning whether Hillary Clinton, considering she lost the election, still has a voice that we in the United Kingdom should listen to.
Look, there was a great British leader named Winston Churchill who came to the United States and encouraged us to take very seriously the dangers and threats that at the time leaders in our country were ignoring. Americans will be eternally grateful to have had that voice of friendship and courage that guided us to see a truth that many in our nation did not want to see. I think that Secretary Clinton and many others in the United States are very concerned about the direction in which the West is headed. We are very concerned about the forces that have been arrayed against us, that are unfortunately being ignored, aided, or abetted by many within our societies who, for a variety of reasons, have found it within in their interest to make common cause with those that are no friends of democracy and are working rigorously and vigorously to undermine the ties on which our countries have built so much success in recent years. I think anyone in good conscience who is concerned about the future of our alliance and the future of our cooperation should speak out. That's what President Obama did in the past, and I would certainly hope that whether it's Secretary Clinton, myself, or anyone else who has those concerns will be willing to do so in the future. That's what friends do.
Next, we asked him whether Hillary was right that the Brexit vote indeed had been a precursor to what happened in the US presidential election.
Well, certainly the United States and a number of other countries in the West, it's become abundantly clear in the aftermath of the last election, have been subjected to psychological warfare on an industrial scale. And this is something that is unprecedented in our recent history and clearly has had an impact on the way that people view institutions and the way that people view the difficult issues that we're wrestling with in our societies. There, by all indications, were serious violations of U.S. law during the last election. And it certainly seems reasonable to assume, although the British government has been somewhat less forthcoming in the information that's been released to date, that there were some nefarious influences in the Brexit campaign as well. So it seems not at all unrealistic to assert that there were some harbingers of the outcome of the U.S. election in the Brexit campaign.
We were also keen to know, why is it so many Democrats in America think the United Kingdom ought to stay part of the EU?
We value institutions. We value institutions that generations of our forebears have built up with the goal of creating a world where our children would be free from concerns about whether or not they're going to be safe and whether or not they're going to have to go to war. And we have, together in the UK and the US, invested an extraordinary amount of energy and political capital in building up the EU and in building up our alliances. Those alliances have served us extremely well. The partnerships that we have made the U.S.-EU economic relationship the most important in the world, the largest in the world. And it's also made the work that we do to promote peace, security, and democracy around the world infinitely easier than it would be if we had to pursue those objectives with a fragmented system. So at a moment when our institutions are in crisis and under fire, I think it's very reasonable to say we should think hard about burning down what we and others have worked so hard to build.
And given that Hillary herself had talked about America becoming part of this hemispheric common market, we also asked Tamika Tillman, her former speechwriter, whether there was any appetite in the US for America to perhaps link up with the EU single market.
I have heard very little to suggest that, so I don't know that that's a very reasonable supposition. What I do think is very reasonable to say, and has certainly been borne out by decades of close economic cooperation, is when the United States and Europe work together on economic policy and on trade policy, we are far and away the most powerful alliance in the world. And we can shape many other variables around the world in ways that are going to be advantageous to us jointly. The more fragmented we become, the more difficult that becomes, and the more it degrades and dissolves the power and the influence that we had previously enjoyed. There is one person who certainly benefits from this, and that's Vladimir Putin. But I think it's important to recognize who's going to be cheering as these bonds become weaker. And ultimately, I think the celebrations will not occur in London, the U.S., or Brussels. They'll be happening in the Kremlin.
You'll notice that very often the Democrats talk about the relationship between America and Europe, meaning the European Union. And certainly in Barack Obama's time, that meant Germany, because when Barack Obama flew to Europe, inevitably Berlin was the first place that he went to. But given that we're on the path to Brexit, we also asked that when the UK leaves the EU for good, can it have a successful trading relationship on its own with America? And bear in mind that it was a Democrat, Barack Obama, who said if we left the EU, we would be at the back of the queue.
Well, we certainly hope so. There's obviously a long history that our countries share in common and a great tradition of shared values. But at the same time, it would be naive to assume, especially in the context of an administration of the White House that views trade with a great deal of skepticism, that any trade agreement is going to be easy to secure. So I think those that imagine somehow that this is going to be a simple task as it relates to securing a trade agreement with the United States or any of the UK's other trading partners are living in a dream world mouthing cliches. This is just not the reality that we face in the world right now.
And finally, we asked, what's the future? With everything, security, defence, trade, what is the future relationship going to be between us and the US?
I don't know. And that's part of what concerns me, and I think many others. In the past, we have looked across the Atlantic and had great confidence in our ability to forge ever deeper and more resilient bonds between our countries. And going forward, I certainly hope that will be the case. But there is a much higher degree of uncertainty. The other great tragedy for Americans, frankly, is that the UK has been an indispensable voice within the European Union and has often been the deciding voice when it comes to speaking up on questions of value and on questions of our common collective security. The absence of that voice from debates in Brussels is going to be felt keenly. And it's something that I think we're still coming to terms with.
Well, that was Hillary Clinton's former speechwriter and director of the Bretton Woods II programme at New America, Tamika Tillman. And, you know, he said, look, she's rather like a modern-day Winston Churchill. She's coming to the United Kingdom. She's warning us that big lies are being put about, particularly online, that the Russians are getting involved in everything, and that 2016 has been an horrendous mistake, and that Britain basically needs to rethink the Brexit vote. So, listen, you've heard my view. I don't think she is relevant anymore. I think she's lost. I think she looks really very whingy. But you've also heard the view that she is a very important international stateswoman who should be listened to. Let's see what you think. And let's go to Brandon, who's calling me from Romford. Good morning, Brandon.
Good morning, Nigel. I'm actually at Cheltenham Literature Festival today to hear Hillary speak. To those that have come to see her. But yep. I have to say, as much as I respect yourself, your opinion, I really think you're terribly misguided with this. And the reason for that is because I have read her book. I've also listened to her on the audiobook. And in both versions, one thing that is consistent throughout is that she consistently says, yes, there are other factors here that played a role in the outcome of the election. However, I was still the candidate. I was still who had to convince the American people to choose me over him, and she says consistently I was unable to do that, and that is my fault and my fault alone. So if you have read the book, Nigel, you would know this. If you have read the book, Nigel, you would know that is the stance that she has taken since. However, the reason why she's still relevant is because she has been incredibly responsible in saying, as much as it was my own fault that I lost the election, let's look at other factors that played a part. Yes, Russian interference. Nigel, her emails dominated the election 3 times more than any other factor in the election. That's both in terms of her policy and Trump's policy. Now, I'm sure even you would know, as a statesman like yourself, that policy should dominate the conversation because that is what actually governs our people. Now, for that fact and statistic that her emails were 3 times covered than anything else just goes to show how deeply concerning Russian interference was, because they were able to wait.
Well, hang on, Brandon. You know, the whole question of how did these 40,000 emails get out into the public domain, it was being sold by her side of the argument that somehow the Russians had stolen them, when probably there's a much more innocent explanation. I take your point. She does in the book say, look, you know, I was the candidate, I failed, but she wraps that up into a great big conspiratorial story that somehow Brexit only happened because those of us on the Leave side lied to the electorate, that the internet is now effectively being used as a force for bad, and that somehow Putin played a major role in Russia. So I take your point. There is a degree of humility in the book, but hey, compared to the bigger picture, she really isn't accepting it. Tell me, have you ever heard her speak before or met her?
I have heard her speak before, and I have met her. I met her last year in September, a campaign event in Tampa in Florida. I was able to shake her hand, and I had a brief conversation with her, in which I found her to be one of the warmest and most down-to-earth politicians and people that I've met. And if you ever have the privilege to do so, I suggest you give her the time that she's due, because the insight that she provided into where she saw the American people going is fantastic. You know,
Brandon, I think it's unlikely that's going to happen, given the things she said about me. Whatever I've said about her this morning, Brandon, is nothing compared to what she said about me. I thank you for the call. Enjoy Cheltenham. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, live from Washington, D.C. It's 10:30. Hillary Clinton's in town, and some think she's like Winston Churchill, coming to warn us that we've made a terrible mistake by voting for Brexit. We ought to rethink the whole thing, and it only happened because awful people like Nigel Farage lied to the electorate. So some people think she's relevant. Do you think we should listen to Hillary Clinton? I don't. I think she's past her sell-by date. I think it sounds like a huge whinge-a-thon. And on text I get, good morning, Nigel, I agree with you. I think Hillary Clinton is irrelevant now, but like Blair, she can still be dangerous to the Brexit cause. Why give her airtime at all, I get on Twitter? She is now no longer relevant to the politics of our country. Paul says on Facebook, frankly, both sides of the Brexit campaign were full of lies and misinformation. That part of the interview was fascinating, wasn't it? When Ma said to her, but surely both sides of the Brexit campaign said things that weren't right, she said she didn't have any information about that. Very convenient, wasn't it? She thinks just one side lied and the other didn't. Angela on Facebook says, Clinton compared to Churchill, how dare anyone utter those two words in the same sentence? And Theo says, Clinton blames the whole world for her defeat. Well, she does. Brandon, who was on before the break, who knows Hillary Clinton and is a supporter, made the point that in her book, What Happened, she does say, hey, I was the candidate, I didn't get the votes, but I don't think there's really much there other than her lashing out and blaming virtually everybody. Sandra is calling from Leighton. Sandra, good morning. Are you listening carefully? Are you listening carefully, Sandra, to what Hillary's telling you?
Well, Nigel, I missed it, but I need to catch up with it. But I'll tell you something, I would so much want to talk to you wrong, and I really wish that you and I could sit down and talk properly, not just for 2 minutes and get cut off. But let me get my point across. If I was actually in U.S. elections, I flew over. If there was no Russian interference, we Democrats would have had to accept the vote. Well, I would. And Nigel, if it was the other way around, right, that there was interference in the U.S. elections or the Brexit, you would be doing what Hillary would be saying. So, yes, she is relevant. She's still alive and well, and we're not going to accept it as us being a sore loser just because of the interference. Why? The sacking of the FBI agent. Donald Trump is scared, and time will tell. Those are my true points. What's your say, Nigel?
All right. Well, let me ask you, Sandra. Number one, do you think that Brexit was won because people were lied to?
Right. I think there was lies, because the truth is, Nigel, I'm a Remainer, but I'm not a Ramona. And if we had a referendum again, I would vote leave, but there was lies on both sides. But my point, Nigel, is this. Had it gone the other way, Nigel, for Remain, you will be screaming on a soapbox saying let's do it again. So because it went your way, it's easy to tell all of us to
frankly,
shut up.
Sandra, there wouldn't be any point, because the chances of a vote in Parliament to give us another referendum, it just wouldn't have even been on the agenda. It wouldn't have happened. But do you genuinely, Sandra, think, you know, in your heart, that Russian interference played a role in a serious role in Trump winning?
Nigel, yes, I do. I don't know. And if it wasn't so, Nigel, I would act, like I said, knowing who I am, if we lost, we lost. You know what, Nigel? I just cannot wait for this, all this investigation to happen, just to see who was right. Yes, Nigel, I do. Okay. I didn't want to believe it, but you know what? There's something ain't right going on with the grudge that Putin's got against Hillary. All this backlash of whatever stuff I don't even know about. But
that was what she said this morning. She said it was a personal grudge by Putin. I don't find that particularly believable. I think there is hysteria here in Washington. Again, rather like the establishment can't explain to themselves why Brexit has happened, so they say it's lies. In America, they cannot believe that Trump, who so many in this town think is coarse and vulgar, they look down their nose at him, they can't believe he won, and they say, there must be a reason. It's got to be the Russians. Sandra, I thank you for your call and for your passion. Charlie is calling from Cardiff. Charlie, good morning.
I think we should still listen to Hillary Clinton. I mean, when you consider she got more votes than Trump, so I think she's still, what she has to say is still relevant. But this actually prompts me to ask you a question, which, putting context, I oppose most of what UKIP stand for and wouldn't want to see UKIP MPs. But I join you in condemning our first-past-the-post system that denied 4 million voters in 2005 their rightful representation. I also hear people, leavers, saying we shouldn't have a second referendum, we should recognise the will of the people. So my question to you is this. Although you wouldn't have wanted Hillary Clinton in, and you support Trump, would you join me in condemning the first-past-the-post system that they use in America, which thwarted the will of the people and gave the the result, the presidency, to the lesser popular candidate.
Well, I don't think...
most votes.
Yeah, I don't think, Charlie, you can compare the two systems. Clearly, our system is massively out of date. I mean, frankly, ludicrous. And obviously, I say that with some strong personal feeling, because how 4 million votes can equate to almost nothing's beyond me. America's different, as you know. They've got this complex electoral college system. Hillary did get more votes than Trump. The reason for that's simple. Trump didn't go to California. He ignored California. And he accepted she'd win California, and whether she won it by 1 million votes or 5 million votes didn't really matter. In terms of the Electoral College, actually Trump won it pretty comfortably. But in terms of her being relevant, Charlie, I mean, I think, despite her denial on this programme, I think the Democrats are in a hell of a mess, now nearly a year on from the presidential election, and something tells me, Charlie, that actually she's trying to stay relevant on the world stage, because I think she intends to run again for the US presidency.
I'm not sure on that. I mean, whether she will or not. I mean, you might be right. I mean, time will tell, I suppose.
I mean, otherwise, why would she bother coming to the UK? Why would she bother sort of joining in with Blair and basically saying Brexit's a huge mistake, it's going to hurt the country badly, companies are going to leave? Why would she bother to do it, if she was genuinely going to retire from politics? That's my view. Charlie, thank you very much indeed for your call. I get by text, I used to agree with Hillary on most things, but these days she is self-entitled and arrogant, says Chris. And I think it is that sense of entitlement, she wants to become the US president as if there was some sort of hereditary principle, that it was hers of right. That, I think, put off a lot of American voters. I wonder what Kingsley, who's calling from Barnet, thinks. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, but to be honest with you, Kingsley, I'm really enjoying Hillary attacking me. I'm having great fun because, I was told years ago you should be judged by your enemies, and I'm perfectly happy for her to be against me. But Kingsley, I really am. But I mean, do you think she's relevant? Do you think she's relevant anymore?
I think she's being propped up until George Clooney gets his act together. I really do. I think George Clooney or some other, totally face-friendly star is going to come in. That's what they're going to do. They're going to keep that kind of dream going. But are you familiar with a television program called Breaking Bad?
Yep.
Have you watched it?
No, I haven't. I've heard all about it. I haven't watched it.
Okay.
Should I?
This is my genuine, only original opinion.
Go on.
The character Walter White is Walter White, and he's the baddest, meanest person. He dissolves people. He doesn't bury them. He dissolves them in these horrible procedures. And he runs with a gang of neo-Nazis. And Breaking Bad was huge across the whole of America, then the whole of the world. You can buy Breaking Bad T-shirts in Primark. Now, Walter White, who runs with a bunch of neo-Nazis, and that's such a popular program. Everybody watched it. Oh, it's amazing. I think that got into the psyche of America and gave the alt-right a voice. It gave them an identity. It gave them this concept that the most intelligent, most successful person is a white man called Walter White, who outsmarts all the ethnic minority people.
Right.
And he is more intelligent than anybody. He outsmarts the FBI, everybody.
But so what's the point of it, Kingsley?
Because that was made about 7 years ago, and it's entered into the psyche of America that there is this white guy called Walter White who runs with neo-Nazis.
Kingsley, let me tell you something. If that's your big go at Trump, the number of alt-right, the number of hard-right voters in America that supported Trump is very low. Most of Trump's voters were ordinary, decent, law-abiding, tax-paying US citizens who'd had enough of being governed by the big international elites. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, live from Washington, D.C. It's 10:46. We're discussing Hillary Clinton. She's in London. Is she still relevant? Are the things she says to us about Brexit, are the things she says to us about potential Russian interference in the American elections, are these things relevant? Are they important? Tim says to me by text, I agree with a lot of your views, but I can't relate to your support for Trump. The guy is a moron. We've got to get him out of the White House. Well, I tell you what, a lot of people have thought all the way through this he's a moron. A lot of people have predicted he wouldn't become the nominee. Virtually everyone said he wouldn't become president. All I would say, Tim, you can think what you like. Don't underestimate him. Dorothy on Facebook says the voting system needs to be changed in the US. Same as it does here. Clinton had 3 million more votes. She did, in California. The way the American system works is each state has a number of votes that go to an electoral college. It's been designed so that the big, most populous states cannot dominate the smaller states that make up most of Middle America. That's the system they've got. I would say this to you, Dorothy. Had Trump said, right, even though we know Hillary's going to win in California, we will spend lots of money and lots of time there, she wouldn't have won by 3 million votes. But that was a decision that he took. And the real question is why she didn't spend more time, why she never once visited Wisconsin, because frankly, she took it for granted. Ken said, I believe the Democrats are imploding. Ken, they have got a very real problem over here right now. Dirk says, the Brexit vote was popular in South Wales. This is where she received her honorary degree in Swansea. Well, there you are. Jason from Sutton is my next caller. Jason, good morning.
Hey, Nigel, good morning to you. All this talk about sort of Hillary Clinton's relevance, you seem to have accidentally stumbled upon something that actually makes Nigel Farage relevant for a change. Talking about the Russian involvement in various political schemes and things, would you care to talk more about your visits to the Deputy Commissioner at the Russian Embassy in 2013 before the Euro elections? Or maybe you'd like to explain to the general public why your name comes up when you triangulate things like Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, the US intelligence services have you tied to Roger Stone, who's admitted having activities and
Jason, you know, I tell you something, mate. I tell you something, man, you want to get out more. You really do. You're clearly trying to tie yourself up in conspiracy theory. The Russian ambassador I met him in the European Parliament, if you really want to know. He was there visiting, meeting lots of different people. Actually, Jason, I've met ambassadors from all sorts of countries all over the world. And you're quite right. Hillary's friends have done their very best to try and tie me in to the Russia story. It's been said in the press that I'm a person of interest to the FBI in these investigations. It is all a complete and utter load of hogwash. I have never been to Russia. I've had no business dealings with Russia. I have no political connections with Russia at all. Nice try, Jason, but sorry, mate, it doesn't work. Chris from Reigate is my next caller. Good morning, Chris.
I'm here.
Hello.
I'm here. Sorry.
Hello. Right, you're on LBC, Chris. Is Hillary Clinton relevant? Come on, tell me. Yeah.
Well, I've got a couple of points actually. Okay. I've got one of your T-shirts from the previous election that got sent through the post, which was good.
Okay.
Hillary Clinton not relevant at all. No. I could go on about the Illuminati, but I won't. Brexit. I listen to LBC most days, and you know, every day it's just Brexit, Brexit, Brexit. Why don't they just get on with it? Trump, I like the guy. You know, we invaded Iraq. Why? For the oil. You know, Libya, I don't know, for whatever. But nobody ever did anything with Mugabe, did they? There's no oil there, is there?
You're broadening out, Chris, a little bit wider than we're trying to do this Sunday morning. But tell me something. When Hillary says that Brexit only triumphed because of the lies that were told by the Brexiteers and the internet, I mean, is that a relevant point, or is she just barking completely up the wrong tree in your view?
Up the wrong tree. And I think the lesser of two evils, we now have Trump. And, you know, with Russia as well, I don't know. The world's a different place now, isn't it? Completely.
Do you know something? Do you know something, Chris? I do think she's right when she says that the Brexit phenomenon spilled over into the US and was a big part of why Trump won. But you know something? If the Democrats had picked any other candidate, they would have won the election. And the reason they didn't win the election is that Hillary Clinton had been around for too long, was seen to be too close to big power, to corruption, to big business, to big banks, and her sense of entitlement put many, many people off. Chris, I thank you. And my last caller on this subject is going to be Tony, who's calling from Fareham. Tony, good morning.
Yes, good morning, Nigel. Yes, I'm just anxious to see all these Russian agents standing outside American polling stations influencing American voters, but I didn't see any.
Absolutely. No. No. And even the idea, Tony, that it's the Russians that stole her emails, I don't think really stands up to any examination at all.
Well, when she was Secretary of State, Putin quite rightly pointed out that the Americans' security services were trying to undermine the Russian election, and that's the reason that Putin didn't trust her at all. And also her foreign policy, along with Obama, is unfortunately now what Mr. Trump is having to sweep up, I'm afraid.
Yeah, which I think in many ways, actually, he's doing pretty well with. He is a presence on the world stage, and I think around the world people listen to what he has to say.
Yes, and with regard to Iran, I think, Iran is playing the much bigger picture now in places like Yemen, Lebanon, and indeed Iraq and Syria. And they're on the verge of controlling the world's oil through the Strait of Hormuz, which has been completely ignored by most commentators, really.
Interesting. No, that's an interesting point, Tony. And your point about interference, actually, and this is the real irony of it, America has interfered in elections all over the world repeatedly. America has been to wars to stop political ideologies such as communism spreading. And it is, in some ways, is it not, a little bit rich, Tony, that a little bit rich that now it's America saying it's other countries that are trying to influence elections. And just lastly, Tony, when she says that Brexit was won because of fake news on the internet and the lies of people like me, what do you respond to that?
Well, the average person on the street with any amount of intelligence can see what's really happening in the world. And for instance, the unrest in America with race division. Much of this happened under Obama's presidency, where many cities in America have now got no-go areas. I mean, that's happened over the last 8 years.
Do you know, you're absolutely right. There is a problem in this country, in America, with race division. Of that, there's no doubt. But one thing for certain, 8 years of Obama didn't make any of that better at all. I thank you very much. And looking ahead to the next hour, the Chancellor has labelled the European Union's Brexit negotiators as the enemy, a remark he subsequently described as a poor choice of words. During a television interview, Philip Hammond also called the negotiators the opponents and said they should behave like grown-ups, with Juncker shouting at us to pay more before moving on to the next stage of the negotiations. Was Hammond right? Is the EU starting to look like the enemy? If you think absolutely, call me on 0345 6060 973. If you think no, they're the good guys, text 84850. Maybe you're on the fence, but you can always tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. Stay tuned. I'm on Facebook and I'm live from Washington, D.C. next.